Those kids are outside selling drugs again.
Ridiculous. We're the only ones allowed to peddle addictive substances around here.
You mean the popcorn?
No, I was talking about the anime section. Welcome to Rewind Video. I'm Bob.
I'm Rob.
And we love movies. Good ones, bad ones, old ones, new ones, big movies, small movies. Rob, I brought the old Rewind Video employee handbook to the table tonight.
No.
I did. And after poring over both pages, I can't seem to find a drug policy. Are you familiar with one?
I am not, and I think it's best we don't bring it up.
Okay, all right.
Because if we pretend like we don't know it exists,
then it won't exist. Right? Yeah, that's a great attitude. Well, you know, whatever you use to take the edge off, whether it's something from the shelves here at the store or a giant bong rip, you know, we feel like we're here for you. And in honor of the latter of those two examples, and to celebrate the fact that this episode is airing on 4/20, we decided tonight to talk about some movies related to drugs. Our job at Rewind Video is to keep the staff recommendation shelf flush with films that are deserving of your attention. Each time we choose a selection of movies, we adhere to a theme, and this week's theme is getting high.
Something we never do behind the store.
Right. No, not at all. Now, this was your suggestion, but, you know, it comes at a perfect time.
Yeah, I felt like I had to choose it for today's episode. I love drugs. Not just doing drugs, though, which I do only moderately and responsibly. But I love some of the things that people on drugs do. I think there's a lot of great musicians and artists and stuff that use drugs. There's a lot of bad sides to drugs also, but you know, I'm glad they're out in the world.
Indeed, and I think they lend themselves to film in a really interesting way. You know, to your point, you know, art is made on drugs, but drugs within art, which you know we're going to be talking about a little bit about tonight, is always fascinating to see. And you know, when I was sorting through movies to choose and thinking about what would make it onto the shelf, I found myself reminded of the ways that filmmakers represent drug use and getting high in a movie. And it feels like there's some familiar tropes that are fallen back upon pretty regularly. Some of them appear in at least one of my movies tonight.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, there are things that happen to your perception when you're on drugs. And I am guessing most of these filmmakers have taken drugs or at least known people that have. And so they're trying to approximate that. And I think a lot of them get kind of close.
I think they get kind of close too. However, I will say that I find myself very tuned in when I'm watching a movie or a show where somebody is high or drunk and it seems not authentic at all. That jumps right out at me.
Yeah, being drunk as an actor, I think, is kind of tough. It always sticks out.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we've got some fun stuff to talk through tonight. After finalizing my picks, realized just by pure coincidence that all three of my movies take place in New York City.
Oh.
Did you know that they have drugs in New York?
There's a lot of drugs in New York.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I've heard.
Indeed. Well, let's just jump right in.
Let's hop in.
Talk about your first movie.
First thing I'm bringing to the table tonight is from 1996. It's a movie called Brain Candy, or also The Kids in the Hall, Brain Candy. This is the satirical pharmaceutical comedy from that comedy troupe. This is filed in the comedy section, the cult comedy section.
Right.
The writers here of this movie are Bruce McCullough, Kevin McDonald, Mark McKinney, Scott Thompson, and Norm Hiscock.
Notably, not Dave Foley.
You will notice Dave Foley is not a writer of this movie. We'll touch on that in a minute.
Right.
Here's the back of the box. A pharmaceutical scientist creates a pill that makes people remember their happiest memory, and although it's successful, it has unfortunate side effects. Tagline, shove this up your mind.
Great tagline.
That is a great tagline.
I love that tagline.
The Kids in the Hall are comedy legends. I don't know what your history is with them.
Oh, I loved their show, and I remember. I mean, this came out a few years after their show ended.
A couple of years, I think about 2 years.
These guys are hilarious.
I grew up on the Kids in the Hall.
Yeah.
I might have seen them in their early days when they were just on HBO, but and I'm not sure about that. But I devoured the show when it was on Comedy Central and in syndication.
So good.
I think they ran it like 4 or 5 times a day, and I probably caught at least 2 of those for several years.
Yes.
They just have a punk ethos to their comedy that was like very attractive to my preteen and teenage brain. Mm-hmm. They were just like this great mix of personalities and talents. They all had different talents in writing their skits, and they could all do different things character-wise. But it all kind of cohered into this single offbeat, funny, like comedic voice.
They were definitely doing things that no other comedy troupe at the time was doing.
No, and there aren't a lot of comedy troupes that end up on TV.
No.
I can't actually really think of too many in the last 30 years that have come out, like that have like broken out to the point where I guess we're at the point now where that's almost impossible. It's just too fractured. But even like between when Kids in the Hall came out and 2005, can you think of like more than 2 sketch comedy groups?
No,
I can't think.
Of the State and
and Mr. Show.
Mr. Show is really the
that's
only
about
one.
it.
Yeah,
but even like the Kids in the Hall, when they would dress up as women in the late '80s, early '90s, and it wasn't like a joke.
Yeah,
that was groundbreaking for the time. They were just like, yeah, we're just playing characters, and they also riffed a lot on suburbia with their like alcoholic fathers and their hopeless mothers.
Yes,
which was actually like very, very much based on their own lives. But the production of Brain Candy occurred during a period of real turmoil for the group. They had basically broken up during this movie. Mm-hmm. Tensions had been building up for years because, first of all, they're putting out a TV show, which back in the 80s, 90s meant you're putting out 25 episodes a year or 20 to 25.
Yeah.
And to write that many sketches of original comedy, and originally it was just the 5 of them that wrote. So like that, I mean, they were just burnt out trying to start careers doing other things. And so they were like, and they never really got along that great in the first place. They just have conflicting personalities that kind of get together.
Yeah.
I just read a book about them called One Dumb Guy. It's written by Paul Myers, who's actually Mike Myers' brother.
Really?
But I think it was Mark McKinney called the group One Dumb Guy. He's like, yeah, we're 5 like pretty smart, talented, and intelligent people, but like we put us all together, we're just one dumb guy. And like that kind of makes sense. I like that description of them.
Indeed.
But in order for them, so they were making this movie in pre-production, writing the script, and it looked like it was definitely not going to happen because they couldn't get a script that anybody liked together, and the studio wasn't interested, and it seemed like they were just going to pull the plug. And so in order for the movie to get made, they had to sign a contract that like I don't even know what the contract said exactly, but they're like, listen, if we don't sign this contract, we won't get paid when they pull the plug for writing the script and doing all this work for the past year. And so everyone had to sign the contract, including Dave Foley. And what he didn't realize was by signing that contract, it meant that if they make the movie, he has to be there.
Yes.
He has to be in the movie. And he was like not into it.
Yeah.
He obviously, his name was not on the script. He's barely in the movie.
Yeah.
His contract stipulated that he wouldn't play any lead characters.
Oh, wow.
He wouldn't play any characters that had significant costumes or makeup. Him and Kevin McDonald, who had started the Kids in the Hall, they were best friends forever. They weren't speaking to each other. Part of Dave Foley's contract was Kevin McDonald will not try to mend our relationship.
Wow.
If he tries to talk to me about it during the production of this movie, I'm quitting that minute. Wow. And so that's how this movie was going.
That's amazing. I mean, I heard that they had to practically sue Dave Foley in order to get him to sign that contract. And I think there was a lot of resentment around him being in news radio and finding success on his own, separate from the comedy troupe. And
there's definitely some of that. And like his career was taking off in that part of Hollywood. You know, he is a guy that can be on a sitcom. He is a guy that can do those kinds of things. And maybe those other guys aren't that. And he was like, listen, like you have to work with me on this. And then who knows? They have their own personal things. But yeah, it was not. They were not in a good place when this movie was being made. And I think the movie suffers a little bit from his absence.
Yeah, I agree.
Luckily, they've since patched things up. They're working together. Him and Kevin McDonald. A few years after this, like they got back together. I think they got back together as a group 4 years later. In 2000,
yeah,
and they just produced a new season of television for Amazon. So they, who knows, they could be making things,
which is connected. That the new series is connected to Brain Candy. So yeah, I
hate to say I have not seen the new season. I'm actually working my way through the whole series. I haven't gotten to the new season yet. I do know what you're talking about, though.
Yes.
But Brain Candy, it's not a perfect movie, but I think it's kind of a must-see for comedy fans. It's a true cult classic, cult comedy. It's not nearly as good as it could have been, but it's pretty great. It's got a tremendous soundtrack.
It does. Yeah.
If you like alternative rock from the mid-'90s, this is fantastic. It's Pavement, Stereolab, Guided by Voices, Tragically Hip, They Might Be Giants, one of my favorites.
Right.
Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet, who I learned from that book that I read that they were pretty much with Kids in the Hall from the beginning through the end. They played all the live shows. They were the house band for every episode they recorded. They were like there for the formation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's news to me. Interesting bit of trivia.
Yeah. So they're very linked up with the Kids in the Hall all throughout their career. I think this movie is a great look at the antidepressant culture that was springing up around the 90s.
Yeah, and it's still relevant today.
Yeah, it saw what was coming, and they made a movie about it. And I think we grew up in that era when that was just starting. You know, I feel like if we had been 5 years older, maybe we wouldn't have even like noticed it happening.
No.
But I think we were there. We were like just growing up when it was like all of a sudden it's everywhere.
Well, I'm not sure about the timelines here, but I want to say that this came out before we lived in a world where pharmaceuticals were advertised on television. And
wow, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, you're right.
And I mean they're talking about marketing a drug in this movie. That's a big part of of this movie, and they were ahead of their time. You know,
I mean. This drug kind of exists, I guess. I don't know.
Sort of. Yeah. Thankfully, not in the form that with at least the side effects that they indicate here.
But it wasn't just the depiction of the modern pharmaceutical industry. It was also Cancer Boy was generally seen as a step too far.
Oh yeah.
To the point where the studio was like, "Listen, we can't market this movie anymore. Like we're done." They really tried to get him out of the script. They really tried to get it out of the movie.
Yeah.
Somehow they weren't successful.
Yeah.
but then still refused to market the movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a bit of a shaggy dog. It's a bit rough around the edges, but it doesn't live up to the potential of what the Kids in the Hall first movie should be, but I still think it's pretty great. I really find it funny. I think there's some great characters, some great scenes. It's a shame we haven't gotten like 5 Kids in the Hall movies already.
I know. I mean, they were definitely trying to emulate the Monty Python model where, it was like, we do TV, now we're going to make some movies, and we're going to be continually successful. And sadly, it didn't work out for them.
Unfortunately, I think Dave Foley's individual success might have had something to do with the fact that like they didn't have the creative output that maybe we wanted them to. But they're not that old. They might still put out a movie or two.
I hope they do.
But we have this one, and I think it's a sugar rush of dark comedy. It definitely deserves a place on the shelf for the topic of getting high.
Couple quick things. I'm so glad you picked this because it was fun to return to. It's hard to return to because this movie is. We have some copies, but you can't stream this. Weirdly, there's a copy. There's a version on YouTube. The studio is just like whatever. We're fine with it. It's just going to stay there.
There is a Blu-ray edition that was just released. I think about 6 months ago. So,
good.
Yes, we're due to get some new copies in. Soon, because I know the old ones have a few scratches on them.
Indeed, and so that brings me to the last thing I wanted to say, which is, have you seen the work print of this movie?
I don't believe so. I've seen an alternate ending, if that's what you mean.
That is kind of what I mean. Yeah. So the movie falls apart a little bit in the third act. You know, it just doesn't end well. And originally it had a very different ending, and that version exists on the internet. You can find it, but yeah, it's clear that I don't think that either of them are necessarily as successful as they probably nearly as successful as the first 2/3 of the film.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting to see what they played with. So if you're a fan of the movie and their comedy, it's worth just tracking down the other take on the end.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I don't want to. I don't want to make it seem like it's a disappointment in any way. It is kind of, because to me this is a 4-star movie, and a Kids in the Hall movie should be a 5-star movie every time. But it's only 4.
Well said. Well, check it out. It's a great first pick for Getting High. I'm going to take us in a very different direction, a decidedly unfunny direction. My first choice is Requiem for a Dream from the year 2000. Back of the box, a hypnotic tale of 4 people each pursuing their vision of happiness. Even as everything begins to fall apart, they refuse to let go, plummeting with their dreams into a nightmarish, gut-wrenching free fall. There is no tagline to this movie. I couldn't find any box that had, anything like a tagline. There's nothing exists.
I don't think it needs one.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I think it's fine without it. What are people getting high on here? Heroin and diet pills, which the diet pills are pretty much like amphetamines. So Darren Aronofsky is on a lot of people's minds right now. He directed The Whale to much critical acclaim in 2022, gave Brendan Fraser a chance to climb his way back into the zeitgeist. So it feels fitting.
Dude, he's in Brain Candy.
Yes.
He is. He's briefly in Brain Candy.
He is. So yeah, it feels kind of natural that we revisit one of Aronofsky's earlier films. And I think this is, without a doubt, his best movie.
It's a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece. This is his sophomore effort after Pi, which, and this is adapted from the Hubert Selby novel by the same name. We've got Jared Leto a year after he appeared in Fight Club and Girl Interrupted. Jennifer Connelly is 1 year from appearing in A Beautiful Mind, which was kind of, a career-making performance. Ellen Burstyn might steal the show here. She plays Jared Leto's mother. She lost 40 pounds for the role. She's fucking incredible. Weirdly, in addition to losing 40 pounds, she also lost her bid for an Oscar to Julia Roberts for Aaron Brockovich, which is just further proof that the Oscars are fucking trash.
She did get a nomination, though?
She did get a nomination.
That's good.
Yeah. Marlon Wayans is here. Christopher McDonald has a great part. Everyone's batting 1,000. So this is ultimately a story about addiction and the impacts that it has on life. For the 4 characters in this film, there are no happy endings. Each person suffers in a unique way. And let me elaborate on that. Not only are there no happy endings, the descent into addiction is traumatizing, horrific, unfiltered, disturbing. I mean, it's a hard film to watch.
But you can see how slippery it is every step.
Oh, yes.
For everybody.
That's such a good way to put it. Yeah. I mean, it happens fast, and, you can see it as a person removed from the lives these people are leading, but they descend quick. 23 years later, this is still as much of a gut punch right now as it was when it came out in 2000.
This was before the opioid crisis really swept across the country.
It was.
This is 2000, so
yeah, it was
before it.
Indeed. So why did I choose this? So many reasons. I'm just going to rattle off a few things that I love. So the performance is, like I said, fucking unstoppable. I think for the 4 main actors, I don't know that any of them have been better in anything else that they were in. Especially true of Jared Leto.
He was pretty good in My So-Called Life.
He was, fair.
I mean, this is before we had any idea that he was kind of a goofball either.
Right.
And so he was just this was just interesting work at the time.
Right. Yeah. And he committed to it.
And I think he's really good at it.
I think he is too. Just the way they play these parts, it's it's a pretty emotionally devastating movie. Somehow you and I watched this countless times shortly after it was released, but I haven't gone back to it since maybe 2005.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in probably about 20 years. And is it weird to say that I have seen this movie as many times as almost anything else I've ever seen in my life?
Right. I think I have an answer to why that happened for me, at least, which I'll get into in a moment. But yeah, it's a captivating film. Not a date night movie. A few other things I love. The soundtrack is amazing. The sound design is amazing. The filmmaking technique that's on display here is really effective. So the way this is shot and edited might sound gimmicky when I list it off, but there's time lapse, split screen shots, snorri cam shots, which are those, when like the camera is affixed to the waist of a person and it's pointing at their face.
And I've seen that a lot in the last 10 years or, ever since this movie came out, but I hadn't seen it before.
No, I hadn't either. Yeah, it's used to great effect here.
Yeah.
There's match cuts, there's dissolves. Again, it all sounds kind of it sounds like it would be distracting when you rattle all of that off. But together here, I think what it actually does is immerse you deeper into what these characters are experiencing. And I applaud Aronofsky for recognizing that, to capture this experience of addiction. And
it's a vision of madness, too, because especially Ellen Burstyn's character, she's going crazy.
Yes.
She's not just addicted to drugs. Like, she's losing it completely.
Yes.
And we get to see that visually.
Yeah.
And you said the sound design. The sound design, the music is insane. The score, the theme song is forever seared in my head.
Yeah.
It's insanely good.
Clint Mansell was the composer, but Kronos Quartet, which is just that, small group of musicians who essentially do like chamber music, they play such an important part in making this movie what it is.
Oh yeah.
It's just a real experience of a film. Yeah, for all the getting high that occurs, nobody ever says the word heroin, which is an interesting thing. There are no shortage of scenes in this film that'll stick with viewers long after the film is over. But I want to point customers to one scene in particular. It takes place in the middle of the film when Jared Leto's character visits his mom, and Ellen Burstyn delivers this heartbreaking monologue on aging. And it's this scene that motivated Aronofsky to adapt the novel. And while it was being shot, you can actually see the camera kind of drift away from Burstyn during her dialogue. And that's because the cinematographer was crying during the performance. And while they did numerous takes, they ended up using that take for the final cut. And it's just a great scene.
I remember listening to a director's commentary with Doug Liman one time, and he has a lot of out of focus shots in his movies, and what he said is like we have to choose the best performance, and it's like if something's wrong with the camera, is like as long as it's not too bad, just choose the best performance.
Preach. That's the right way to do it. Critical response was positive upon release, has only grown more positive since this movie came out. Of all the reviews that I looked at and pull quotes that I saw related to this, the one that stuck out to me was by Scott Blake of IGN, who said, the reason this works so well as a film about addiction is that in every frame, the film itself is addictive.
It is.
I loved that take. It's just
that's really
so
true.
Accurate. I couldn't agree more. This clocks in at a 4.1 on Letterboxd. The 5-star review from Kayla does a nice job of summarizing the experience of watching this. Her review is simply, this is a horror movie.
It is, and there's a lot of horror techniques, and it's a tough movie to watch, but to me, it's insanely watchable at the same time.
Oh,
it's
yes.
tough emotionally, but it's not gruesome. Visual. I mean, it's gruesome, but it's like, I don't know. It's not gross. It's just a tough movie. It's a wrenching movie.
Yeah, it's painful.
It's painful, but it's so visually interesting, and the sound just sucks you in. That song is addictive.
Aronofsky wanted this to be a timeless movie in the way that he approached making it, and I think that it's holding up. Today, it doesn't feel dated. Even the techniques, it all just really works.
It seems totally fresh.
Yep. Well, it's going on the shelf. Second movie of the evening for Getting High. If you haven't seen it, check it out. If you have seen it, check it out again.
And again and again and again.
Yeah.
All right. I'm actually going to choose another movie from the psychotronic section.
Okay.
I'm going to choose a movie from 2018. It's called Mandy. This is Panos Cosmatos' psychedelic horror movie from 2018 starring Nicolas Cage.
What a name.
Yeah, I imagine it's Greek. I don't really know. He's Canadian.
Okay.
Yeah. He's from Canada. Anyway, here's the back of the box. The Shadow Mountains, 1983. Red and Mandy lead a loving and peaceful existence. But when their pine-scented haven is savagely destroyed, Red is catapulted into a phantasmagoric journey filled with bloody vengeance and laced with fire. Again, this movie has no tagline.
Sometimes you don't need one.
This one does not need a tagline.
No, it doesn't.
Anybody who's seen this movie understands that.
Yep.
Drugs are a very important component to this movie. The cult at the center of this movie that fucks up Mandy and Red's existence, they're a Jesus freak group, but they're also acid freaks at the same time.
Yes.
They also have as their muscle a group of mega acid freaks, zombie biker type guys who've apparently done such depraved drugs and in such amounts that they are basically subhuman.
Yeah.
We also get acid dropped directly into an eyeball in this movie.
Right.
And it's chased with an evil hornet sting, which I don't know if that's a real thing.
I don't either, but I'm not mad at it.
I'm not mad at it. I know, like, if you take acid in the eyeball, that's definitely going to work.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know of any hornets out there that'll give it, like, an extra cool high part of it, too, but I don't really know. Another drug we get, or at least another drug delivery system, is we get apparently a PCP smoothie.
Right.
In the movie.
Yeah.
That's either like fruit blended with yogurt or it might be paint. I don't know.
Right.
It looks really thick.
It does.
But it fucks you up. It fucks you up real bad.
Gets you where you're going.
This movie is a sneaky good look at cults and how they use drugs and sex to control people, how to bring people in and then control them once they're inside.
Yeah.
Nick Cage, at the end of this movie, Nick Cage is offered sexual favors multiple times in order to spare somebody's life or people's lives, and he declines.
Right.
There's that part where they blow I think it's called an ocarina, like that whistle thing. And I was like, and they to call the acid bikers out. And I think that is like very emblematic of this movie. It's like, that is super corny. It was even a joke in Anchorman, but somehow this movie makes that work. Like, it works.
I know. Well, I'm sure you'll get to this, but the vibe of this movie it's all vibe, lends itself to that type of thing.
Yeah.
And you don't, to just talk about it like we are right now, it's like, really, there's an ocarina and it works.
Yeah.
It fucking works.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. I mean, the movie's having fun. Yeah. It's not. There's nothing funny really. There's a couple laugh lines or laugh things.
Yeah.
But it's not really a funny movie. But it's having fun being itself. It's having fun being metal and scary and bloody and wild and batshit. The way the drug trips are depicted, like we were talking about before, it's like to me, it's right on.
Yes.
I'm not going to say whether I've had experience with acid before,
right?
But I've heard that the weird shading in people's faces and the way that things are kind of like off in time and the way that voices sound and how movement is perceived in this movie, to me, is right on.
Yes. Yeah. It's made by somebody who seems to have experience with conveying what this experience might be like.
Well, it's funny you say that. I don't know what Panos Cosmatos' history is, so I'm not gonna speak to that. But actually, going back to that Doug Liman director's commentary. I believe that was for the movie Go, which to me also has some really good drug sequences from like the perspective of somebody on drugs. But during that director's commentary, he said, "I've never done drugs, but I've talked to a lot of people that have, and so this is what I perceive them to be telling me." And I think he kind of got it right on. So you don't necessarily have to have that experience.
Yeah.
Probably helps.
Yes.
I think chances are people who make this kind of stuff have had that experience.
Yeah.
I love how metal it is that
Oh,
the cult leader's shitty Carpenter's ripoff music is what breaks Mandy out of this acid trance.
Yeah.
And it's so metal that she's just like, it's like, I can't take you seriously because of your shitty music.
Yes.
But Mandy's like clearly into heavy metal music and the whole like metal fantasy fiction type world. And like she never thinks it's going to like cross over into the actual world. But then now here we are.
This is such a love letter to the metal culture that I don't know that I've seen a movie like this that appreciates that type of music and everything associated with it in a way that Mandy does.
I will say I've not seen a movie like this.
Yeah.
The visual style is like unlike anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I've heard that one of the influences that he used that he had for this movie, and I think for pretty much his whole career, is the covers of heavy metal albums.
Yes.
And the covers of those books and the comic books and stuff. Not kind of like he imagined stuff that was inside those that weren't inside of them, and that we are actually seeing what he thinks was inside those things that weren't actually there.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Because this movie is like has such a saturated color palette. It's got these weird lights. It's got like I don't know if you noticed the flickering lights in like 5 different scenes. It's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And you know what it's something in the scene, but why is he like? It's just insane. It's just mesmerizing. It puts you in this trance.
Both great words to describe this movie.
And there's a last known photograph quality to like a lot of shots in this movie.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to put it. There's so much that we could talk about what makes this movie great. But 2 things that I wanted to speak to, both related to the cast in general. I think this was when Nicolas Cage's resurgence began. I mean, he's been in movies forever, and he definitely had his heyday in the 90s when he was in like The Rock and Con Air and all that stuff, and then fell off the radar, but never stopped starring in things. And this somehow brought him back. I think this was the beginning of his renaissance, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say he ever went away.
No,
but I don't know. I don't know. I don't think he's had a better performance than this.
He's phenomenal in this.
I mean, there's moments in this movie that only he could do.
I agree 100%. And to that point, I think that it helps that he is flanked by such a remarkable cast. There's not a lot. I mean, there's definitely some people that we've seen in other movies here. Richard Brake is one of them, but Bill Duke is in this. We talked about him in Predator. But there's just some the way this movie is cast and the looks of the people who were chosen for, especially the cult, pitch perfect.
Yeah. Not really sure what the tiger was doing there, but it's pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that makes no sense. That is just fucking awesome. Like the battle axe that Nick Cage forges before he like kicks people's asses. It's like that makes no sense. He's gonna have time to do that, but at the same time, thank fucking God he did that.
Yeah,
it's so cool.
It's so cool.
But yeah, in some of this movie, it just like it looks like a lot of it looks like it was shot in 16 millimeter, even though I know it wasn't.
Right.
Or it looks like an old VHS tape that you found at a flea market. There's just like this fuzzy, hazy quality to some parts of this. And it's also brings back like how you visualize some of the horror stuff from our youth that maybe wasn't quite like that.
Right.
We kind of remember it as like this haze of these weird colors or old tapes that were played 1,000 times.
Right.
But yeah, the music, there's music in this movie. there's a lot of sounds.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just guitars and like instruments, musical instruments, but they're not really playing music. They're just making noise and sounds and just like giving us this vibe.
Yes.
That just kind of like adds to the whole thing. So yeah, Mandy, it's not for delicate sensibilities. It's a pastiche of heavy metal and horror imagery. But I think it manages to congeal into a singular, bloody, maniacal vision. And to me, it's a horror masterpiece, and I'm putting it high on the staff recommendation shelf this week.
It's exactly where it belongs. I remember watching this and just being taken away by it the first time I saw it. And I think immediately after, I just wanted to see something about how it was made, because you're left with this thought of, how did this get made? It seems like such a unique vision that was untarnished whatsoever by any studio interference. Like this seems to be exactly the movie that Panos tried to make. And I saw an interview with him where he was talking about it, and he said that this is a simple story. It's essentially a revenge story. But for me,
it's a simple story, but
it's he goes on to say, it's not about how complex a story is, it's about how the story is told. And I think he does such a remarkable job of telling this in an original way.
It seems like he had a vision in his head, and it is exactly what we saw.
Exactly.
I can't it just seems like that is like he was like, I want to make this, and he visualized it, and somehow we got to see that. It just seems so perfectly realized.
Yeah.
And it also, when you first watch it, especially, you're like, what did I just watch? Especially halfway through, you're like, what's going on here? Because it's so slow, but it doesn't. But it's still. But it's there's so much tension at all times, and you're just like in the atmosphere, and like you never feel that time. It's fantastic.
This movie rewards multiple rewatches, and while it's a lot newer than Requiem for a Dream, I think that it will feel as timeless as Requiem when we're a quarter century removed from when this was released, because it's going to last.
I think it's going to take time for it to fully seep its way into the culture.
Yeah.
But I think in 20 years we're going to look back and say this is one of the greats.
Fucking masterpiece. Great choice. I love this one. I'm going to go to 2011 with my second choice, and that movie is Limitless.
Sweet.
Yeah. Just, be easy. Back of the box. A paranoia-fueled action thriller about an unsuccessful writer whose life is transformed by a top-secret smart drug that allows him to use 100% of his brain and become a perfect version of himself. His enhanced abilities soon attract shadowy forces that threaten his new life in this darkly comic and provocative film. A lot of adjectives thrown into the back of that box. Tagline here.
They probably could have cut the darkly comic part.
I think so. Yeah, for sure. Tagline, everything is possible when you open your mind. Bad tagline.
That's bad.
Yeah. The tagline should have been Adderall the movie.
They could have just gone with nothing like some of these other movies.
Yeah, that's fine. More movies need to adopt that approach.
Unless you have one that's awesome.
Right. Yeah, which happens.
Yeah.
What are people getting high on here? It's a fictional pharmaceutical called NZT. So I find this to be a movie that is just highly rewatchable. It's fast-paced, fun, immersive. This is a popcorn movie if there was one.
Yeah.
It features a take on getting high that's not your usual run-of-the-mill, light up a joint and get baked getting high. Limitless comes to us by way of Neil Berger. He did one of the Divergent movies. He also did The Illusionist, a couple episodes of Billions. We get Bradley Cooper here. Robert De Niro and Abby Cornish. Cooper is great. De Niro collecting a paycheck. Cornish.
He deserves those paychecks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not begrudging him that.
I agree. I think Abby Cornish is kind of winning a participation award, but Bradley Cooper can
There's a lot of participation in this movie.
There is, yes. Everybody's there.
Everybody's in the movie.
Yeah. Bradley Cooper, I think, can carry this all on his own. In 2011, he's kind of on the upswing. So he's like 2 years removed from The Hangover, 1 year removed from The A-Team. And then...
He wasn't quite Bradley Cooper yet, maybe?
Right. Yeah. And I think that Neil Berger found exactly the right actor at just the right point in his career for this part because, yeah, Bradley Cooper just has that charisma and he's at the right age. You can buy him as somebody before he's on this drug who's not doing a lot of things right. And then when he is on the drug and he's like the best version of himself, it's like, fucking totally buy it.
Yeah. You think the hard part for Bradley Cooper is being the loser at the beginning, but he's good at that.
He is good at that. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that it worked out the way it did because Shia LaBeouf was originally cast in this part, but had to drop out because he was in a car accident. It was probably the beginning of the descent for Shia LaBeouf, which I'm not mad that, Shia was not the right guy for this. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't kidding when I said the tagline should be something like Adderall the movie. This feels like it was written by somebody who took Adderall for the first time.
I will also say it seems a little bit like it was written by someone who took Adderall for the first time and then it wore off towards the end.
Right. Yeah, I'll come back to that because I agree with you. Plot, super simple. Down on his luck guy discovers a miracle drug and becomes a perfect version of himself. Hijinks ensue.
Yeah.
I mean, it passes the elevator pitch test. Why did I choose it, though? What I love about this movie is that there's something so incredibly alluring about the high that is created by the drug in this film. It's not a euphoric high. It's an enlightened high. And, the absolute best version of yourself is just a fun thing to imagine.
Yeah.
And, when you see this happen to Bradley Cooper, you can't help but to wonder what the best version of your own self might be like. And it's helped by the fact that, the drug affects different characters in different ways in this movie. So, yeah, the gears start to turn and you're like, wow, what would I do?
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
I don't know. But I also like that.
I mean, besides be a really good video store clerk.
Well, yeah. There's not a lot of room to improve.
Yeah. Well, there's room to improve. Not a ton of upward mobility.
Yeah, maybe that's a better way to describe it. But, I do like that the things that Bradley Cooper does when he begins taking this drug feel very believable. It's not like this guy realizes that he's suddenly a super genius and sets out to cure cancer or solve world hunger. He's like, I'm going to hook up with my neighbor. I'm going to clean my apartment. and it's, he's a selfish guy who just wants to succeed. And I'm glad that this movie didn't try to make him into something better than that.
But it also, I mean, he didn't know his potential at first. He doesn't, you don't. He also was like, you can only really take care of what's right in front of you as well.
Right. That's true. And, what he does at the beginning really only applies to that first time taking it. But even as he continues, and he gets to the point where he has a tremendous supply of this drug, he's still mostly just out to look after himself, which is fine. I think it makes for a better – it's a smaller movie because of it, but
I don't want to see the movie where he's – curing world hunger.
No, neither do I.
That's just like a lot of research and, paperwork.
100%. Yeah, so, this is one of those films that tries to dramatically change the experience of even watching the movie once, the high is being experienced by a character on screen. So, like, they turn the contrast way up and it gets, like, more way the fuck up. And
that shot where they're going down the street and it just keeps, like, repeating and you're going deeper and deeper and deeper. That's a really cool shot.
It is a cool shot. And it does a good job of showing you what is supposed to be happening to this character, which is, like, they're losing time and just kind of blacking out almost while they're on this drug.
That is what it's like being on these kinds of drugs. And actually, that's a little bit what it's like being on acid, so I've heard.
So, yeah, that rumor has it.
Yeah. That's what people at the store say.
Yeah.
Mostly customers.
Only. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. We hear it. But, I feel obligated to mention something that you touched on, which is there are some glaring plot holes in this film. Stuff that's pretty hard to turn a blind eye to. But I don't think this is trying to be a film with a bulletproof plot line. It just wants you to buckle up, enjoy the ride, and not ask too many questions about how you got from point A to point Z.
Yeah. The plot hole, I'm not bothered by the plot holes. And I mean, this movie is what it is. It's a 3-star actioner. I'm not bothered by the plot holes. What I wanted more, the thing is, like, the last half of this movie, it kind of turns into a little bit too rote of a thriller.
Yeah.
And there's not enough drug stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like there needs to be like a point where he like comes across somebody who's like been doing it for 5 years and has this, there needs to be something, there needs more drug stuff in the second half. We need another scene or two where we see somebody else who's either mastered it or something like that.
Could not agree more.
Some cool drug stuff.
Could not agree more. Now, some of the faults of this movie could be potentially explained by the fact that the writer here, a woman named Leslie Dixon, somehow managed to sell the screenplay under the condition that it would not receive any rewrites whatsoever by anyone else.
What?
Yeah, I don't know how
even herself.
I don't know how she managed to get that condition written into things, but this is essentially like her draft that got shot.
That is crazy.
It is crazy. But to your point, I think that there was some recognition that there's more to do with this world. There was a 2015 TV series based on this idea. That only ran for one season. Incidentally, Darren Aronofsky was a producer for it.
Oh, strange.
But I would watch more of this story. I'd love to see those interactions with people that have been on a drug for a while.
I don't know what the TV show's about, but I think it'd be cool to see the background of this drug, maybe some of the research, maybe, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing I'll say, I don't know about you, but I really found myself wishing that this movie was rated R. It feels like it is handcuffed to the PG-13 bedposts, and I want to see more violence. I want to see more sex. I want to see all the things that happen unfiltered when a person is on this drug, and the consequences of having and using and possessing this drug. All of it feels like it begs to be rated R.
For sure.
Critical response essentially amounted to, this is a 3-star movie. And yeah, it is.
We agree.
3 gold stars, yeah. Ebert was just slightly lower with a 2.5 rating. His review was basically like, not terrifically good, but the premise is intriguing. Comes in at a 3.3 on Letterboxd. The user Griffin said, "Oh man, this is so silly. At least the premise is cool and it has a nice message. Drugs are tight and you should abuse the shit out of them."
I agree with the last part.
Yeah.
This is an aggressively premised movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I think it does a great job of fulfilling the premise for the first, half to 2/3 of the movie, and it kind of forgets the premise at the last part. But otherwise, if this is a premise, you're like, I want to see what that's like in a movie. You're going to see what that's like in a movie.
100%. And before we move on, I forgot to mention earlier, seeing Ebert's name here reminded me that if you haven't watched the clip from the Siskel and Ebert show where they talk about brain candy, it is wildly entertaining because
I will look that up.
Siskel loved it. Ebert fucking hated it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, they almost come to blows, but it's fun. It's fun to watch. It's on YouTube. Check it out.
I'll definitely look that up. All right, I'm going to take us to the Russell Crowe road rage movie, Unhinged, from 2020. This movie is directed by Derek Bort, or maybe Borte? But written by Carl Ellsworth, who wrote the movie Red Eye, which you brought to the table before.
That's right.
Or to the shelf, as it were.
Yeah.
Here's the back of the box. A divorced mother honks impatiently at a deranged, middle-aged stranger at a red light while running late on her way to work. His road rage escalates to horrifyingly psychotic proportions as he becomes single-mindedly determined to teach her a deadly lesson for provoking him. Tagline, it's a good one. He can happen to anyone.
That is a good one.
Right?
Yes.
This movie came out in 2020. It came out in August 2020. It was the first movie to come out in theaters after the pandemic had started.
Oh, wow.
And that was, everyone's like, well, this is an unhinged move to put a movie out in movie theaters at this point. But it takes place in a world spinning out of control.
Yeah, the movie was like, we'll show you Unhinged.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people didn't see it because a lot of people didn't see movies in 2020 unless they were streaming. And this one was in theaters. Like nobody was in theaters.
Empty theaters.
Yeah. But the very beginning of this movie lets us know what we're in for. We start with a bang. Crow's character brutally murders his ex-wife and new husband and then burns down their house. And we see it from a distance, and we don't really understand what's happening at first. He's just gobbling his pills. But it sets the tone level for this movie to insane right away.
Yes.
Gives us every reason to fear this guy. But also the opening credits, I think, are a very important part of this movie because it starts to show the world that is just a place of surging chaos. Traffic, road rage, people not able to handle the world, on their phones all the time, losing their minds. And the opening credits of this movie really do show that to us. The world is moving at a speed that we're like not able to handle. And I think this movie coming out in 2020 and being seen in right in the middle of the pandemic, it's kind of an exaggerated world of 2020 that we ended up living through after this movie came out.
Oh, yeah.
The United States was a very unhinged place in 2020.
Yep.
The way that traffic is portrayed in this movie is pretty unrealistic. I don't know how you thought about that.
Yeah.
Everything's either like completely deadlocked or wide open.
Right. No in between.
Yeah. And where does this movie take place?
No idea.
Because the opening shot, not the opening shot of the movie, but the opening establishing shot after the credits has the Los Angeles Times building in the shot. And then everybody's license plate says America's Heartland. And then later she's on the phone and she says she's on I-95, which to my knowledge doesn't leave the East Coast.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, right up and down.
Los Angeles and the East Coast are not part of a heartland that I know of.
Well, wait a minute. Maybe this is all intentional because you've got the Los Angeles Times representing the West, Heartland in the middle, I-95 in the East, and maybe the idea is like this is a representation of America.
Maybe you're right. I think whether it's intentional or not, it adds to the chaos and confusion of this movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, but not a lot does in this world when it comes to people's handling of reality.
Yeah.
But yeah, this could be anywhere.
It could be.
And it might be everywhere. But Russell Crowe's character is an opioids-fueled madman. We established that he's an actual maniac.
Yes.
Before the road rage incident even happens.
Right.
I think you think of a road rage movie, you think of this woman's in traffic and a guy flips out and they have a road rage thing. But I personally wasn't ready for a murder by hammer scene to start the movie that has nothing to do with road rage.
Oh, no. It's a bold choice.
Yeah. So he's a broken man, psychologically and physically. His gut,
2 C's.
His gut is, disproportionate isn't even the right word. It seems like it's like he's a large person and like the rest of his body is a little overweight.
Yeah.
But it seems like that gut is fake.
It does. And, you recommended this movie to me like a year ago. And I watched it immediately and found myself thinking a lot about Russell character's physical presence in this movie, or Russell Crowe's physical presence in this movie. And I couldn't decide if he prepared for this part and got big for it, or it was just like, we think Russell Crowe would be perfect for this, and he is, and this is just what he looks like now.
I think it's probably the second, but it's also perfect for the part.
Oh, so good.
It's so good.
Yeah.
He can barely move around. He's just like, his walk is strained, like going from place to place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But even so, he's a crazy person, but he has a real moment of vulnerability when with the mom when he it sounds like a sincere apology, and he's kind of like having that moment of pain, and he's just saying like, I'm struggling here, like I'm having a real hard time. Granted, he's just killed 2 people.
Yeah.
But like, it seems like what he's saying is coming from a real place.
Yeah.
And he's just saying like, please just apologize to me so I don't have to kill more people.
Yes.
But he's so unsettling. He's just like popping pills and sweating and bleary-eyed and delusional.
Oh yeah.
And I think, he's had a whole bottle of pills by the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unhinged, it's just a tense, fast genre movie. The sheer terror of Russell Crowe's character it makes this more than a road rage movie. I think it's a great example of a type of movie that I love, which is just a genre movie that picks one thing and then does that one thing really well.
Yep.
Russell Crowe is behind the wheel of that car almost the whole movie. And most of the characters, we're on the road. It's about a lot of car chases, great car crashes, very violent. There's a pretty cool leaping eyeball stab to end it all. So I'm putting it on the shelf for getting high.
I cannot emphasize enough how important Russell Crowe's presence in this movie is, because he's just so perfect in this time in his life, whether he prepared for it or not, as this character. And you said this was written by the same guy that did Red Eye?
Yeah.
Well, that guy understands how to do movies like this, because it's either like terror on a plane or terror on the road, and each time it works. Like,
that was another movie that was just like, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's going to be 90 minutes. We're going to do this thing, and then the movie's over.
Yeah. And in each case, it shouldn't be entertaining to watch people sitting in airplane seats. It shouldn't be entertaining to watch people behind the wheel as often as you see it in this movie. But it's done so well. So it's a tense movie. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to see it. And I wouldn't have watched it otherwise. Had you not made the pitch for it, I probably would have skipped over this. But
yeah, it fell into a time period that it might have disappeared for some people, but you should definitely go back.
Thank goodness for the staff recommendation shelf.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We get that comment all the time in the store.
All the time. Well, great final pick. I'm going to move to my third choice for getting high, and it is 1971's Born to Win. This was another one brought to us by the customers. This was a recommendation from them, and I'm glad I got to see it.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
It is. We're all in this together. So back to the box here. A New York City hairstylist and heroin addict struggles to support his expensive drug habit and turns to petty crime to fuel it. When he falls into trouble, he snitches on his fellow junkies to avoid arrest, but ends up overwhelmed and plagued with guilt. Tagline is pretty long here. It doesn't really feel like a tagline. Their story is written on his arm. If they can get a grip on each other, maybe they can turn their lives around. Bad tagline.
It's a bad one.
Yep. What are people getting high on? It was mentioned. Heroin.
Yeah.
So we talked about Uncut Gems a few episodes back during our fun and games theme. And tonight we've got George Segal playing a hairdresser in 1970s New York, channeling a lot of the same energy as Adam Sandler's character from Uncut Gems. So very different movies. But both are about a down-on-his-luck guy making a lot of bad decisions and not much going his way as a result. In the case of Born to Win, Segal plays the character of Jay. He's a junkie who's constantly trying to get ahead and failing every time. He's got the words Born to Win tattooed on his arm, but winning is not what Jay does.
Junkies generally don't get ahead.
Nope. No, they do not. Yeah, Segal has a quote in his film which captures everything you need to know about his character. He says, I'm a very boring guy when I'm straight.
Yeah.
That's probably true. Alongside Segal, we get Karen Black as Parm in a strong supporting role. Robert De Niro in one of his early roles is in this. Hector Elizondo.
Babyface Robert De Niro.
Yeah, babyface De Niro.
Still looks like he's 45.
He does. Hector Elizondo's here. It's got a decent cast, but I'll get back to my favorite character when I talked about why I picked this. This movie is a little slow to get started. It's a little bit tonally imbalanced, especially at the end, but the middle of the film, especially after we get to see Jay and Parm playing off one another, is interesting. Why did I choose this, though? I picked it because, when it comes to telling stories about getting high, I think the setting matters. And 1970s New York is fucking mesmerizing. It's just...
Yeah, it was a great place to do heroin.
Right.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I don't know that you mean it exactly the same way, but the character does talk about it in the sense that he was like, well, the reason I'm doing heroin is because I'm here around all these junkies in this place.
Yes.
And if I go somewhere else, I just won't be a junkie anymore. And it sounds like that's a crazy thing to say, but that's actually been borne out by science.
Yes.
Especially in this era when people were coming back from Vietnam.
Yes.
Something like 20% of people were heroin addicts, of the soldiers were addicts in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And when they came back, most of those people just gave it up because they weren't in that situation anymore.
Right.
And so there is something to be said for setting when it comes to drug use.
Yes. And, the point you just made, I think, even ties back to that quote, I'm a boring guy when I'm straight. It's clear that, Jay's character is a junkie because that's what he knows how to do. And we...
That's what my friends do, and that's what we're good at.
Right. So, yeah, to get back to the place a little bit, I really love this era of New York City. It's absolutely a place where George Siegel's character would exist. And, that's because this city in this time period is a character in and of itself. This is back when John Lindsay was the mayor of New York, and the city was not in a great place. It was bankrupt, literally and figuratively. There was a transit strike. Drugs were everywhere.
But man, it looked good in movies.
It did look good in movies. You get to see George Siegel running around getting in all sorts of trouble. But while it all unfolds, I find myself looking past the characters and at the city around them during this movie. This works for me because it's a glimpse into a place where junkies were on every corner and people were struggling to get by.
The good old days.
Yeah, right, yeah. And I think when you see that version of New York, it's always fascinating because it's such a different city than what we're all familiar with today. That's it. I mean, the city is transformed in such a dramatic way, and to know that it used to be exactly like this.
I mean, it's changed a lot since the 90s.
Yeah.
And I remember even back in the 90s, people were like, you should have seen the 70s.
Right. Apart from the setting, you do get some fun moments with George Siegel. It's something of a character study. It's also got some funny bits. Naked George Siegel running around the streets of New York in a muumuu. Hard not to laugh at.
It's a junkie hangout.
It is a junkie hangout.
There's not a lot of tension in there's a lot of bad stuff that happens to this guy, but not a lot of tension to it.
No.
Not a lot of stakes for us as the audience. It's just more like, look at this guy. Oh, look at the hijinks.
Yep. Critical response zeroed in on Siegel's performance. But again, I think that New York itself makes Born to Win worth a watch. I will say, if you're curious about Born to Win, I'd suggest getting your hands on one of the copies that we have here in the store. It's available to stream, but the label Fun City restored and released a Blu-ray version of the film that looks great. The streaming version, however, is awful. It's like 4:3, and it's terrible. So support your local video store and the great labels that are restoring out-of-print films.
Always go to physical media when you can.
100%. Couldn't agree more. So that is Born to Win, and that is going on the shelf as my final choice for getting high. As always, thanks for paying a visit to Rewind Video. This week, the staff recommendation shelf will get you the fix you're after with Brain Candy, Requiem for a Dream, Mandy, Limitless, Unhinged, and Born to Win.
Oh, Bob, I know you like websites because we've talked about it.
I love websites.
You love websites, but do you like questions?
Fond of them.
Well, if any customers want to ask us any questions for an upcoming customer Q&A type content, go to rewindvideopod.com to get on our mailing list, and from there you can send us emails.
Yeah, I love this idea of fielding some questions.
Yeah.
Why did we choose this theme and not that one? Or why did you ignore this movie? Or
why didn't
something about the store?
Yeah, or where can we get some of those cool drugs that you guys keep talking about?
Right.
And if you enjoy the show, be kind, recommend it to a friend.
Listen, that does it for this week's episode. Our next episode is all about stories that take place over the span of 24 hours or less. We'll have 6 movies to recommend, but of course, we're also interested in what you think, so don't hesitate to hit us up on social. In the meantime, feel free to stop by the counter for a movie to watch, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Hail